Chapter 6. End of World War II. The Americans rode into town. On 15th May, 1945, the Americans rode into town. There were more tanks, trucks, jeeps, and guns than I had ever seen before. But we were not afraid. Only happiness prevailed among those of us who had virtually been slaves for so long. Now we were free. I promptly retired from work when the Americans arrived, but the Russian couple who were with us stayed on. The couple didn't want to return to Russia and felt that life would be better for them there on the farm. As I look back on it now, I can see that they were right. Eventually, I am sure that it became paid employment for them. A similar situation existed with black slaves after the Civil War in the United States. They had no place to go after they were freed, so they stayed on and worked for their previous masters, the Nazi roundup. As was usual, when the Americans arrived, they began to round up the Nazis and were about to arrest the farmer since he too was a Nazi. But I pleaded with them and told them what a good man he had been and how good he had been to all the workers. They let him go. I think that he belonged to the Nazi party only for protection from the Nazis, and never was a true Nazi anyway. The displaced persons camp. Our state of happiness and glee was short-lived when after a month or so we were told that all Russians and Polish citizens would have to gather into a displaced persons camp located in the town of Ering. There we would wait for transportation back to our countries. Most of us were anxious to return home to our families, and we gathered into the camp as directed. We were not supervised and had to fend for ourselves. There were barracks and other types of buildings in the camp for us to live in. I took in washing from American soldiers. They would pay me in German marks, but often they would put canned goods and other items of foodstuff in the clothes bag. So I managed to get along, but after about 3 months I became very ill with infected tonsils and had to go to the hospital. I was left behind. After rest and treatment for about 2.5 weeks, I returned to the camp, where much to my surprise, I found that everyone had gone home to Poland and Russia. I was met by American soldiers who told me that I wouldn't be able to stay at the camp as they were about to begin remodeling the camp for military use. I had to have a place to stay, and I noticed that a small building right on the edge of the camp had an empty room. I was told that I could live there temporarily. It had a bed, stove, table, and chairs, and it was warm and dry. So that was good enough for me under the circumstances. I was able to stay there for a month or so before I had to move. Flirting American soldiers. It was while living in this temporary shelter that I met the man who would become my lifelong companion. Surely the Lord must have been watching over me. I had met Maria, a Polish girl who was about my age and used to go places together. One day we went to a restaurant, and as we sat there we noticed 2 American soldiers looking at us. They obviously wanted to flirt, so I told Maria that we better get out of there and go home. I didn't want to get mixed up with soldiers. My mother had warned me that they are here today and gone tomorrow. We tried to sneak away from the restaurant without being noticed, but the boys had their eyes on us and tried to follow us. One came up alongside me and asked if he could walk me home, but I refused. Soon after, he began dating my friend Maria. His name was Muriel Wellhausen from Houston, Texas. For the next few weeks, every time he saw me, he would ask why I didn't have a boyfriend. I told him that soldiers were here today and gone tomorrow, so I didn't want to get mixed up with them. Muriel had a handsome friend that I should meet. One day Muriel told me that he had a very nice friend that he would really like me to meet. I didn't agree right away, because I was still reluctant to get mixed up with soldiers. That didn't stop him. He still felt like I should meet this handsome friend of his, so I finally gave in and agreed to meet him. This was in September 1945 when Muriel brought his friend to see me. The friend was Sergeant Ronnie Lester Graybeale. He was indeed handsome, blonde with greenish eyes and a good physique. We met briefly, and then the four of us, including Maria, went off to the theatre to watch a movie. That was the beginning of a courtship that has never ended. At first, we tried not to be too excited over each other. I think we both felt that we didn't want to become too much involved with someone that we probably would only see for a short time and then part company. Never to see each other again in this life. He was to return to the States soon, and I would probably have to return to Russia soon. So why fall in love and be hurt? I had been hurt enough already with my first and only love affair. I wasn't ready to be hurt again, but we kept seeing each other almost every night. The NCO Club. The US Air Force had converted an old barn on the edge of town into a beautiful non-commissioned officers' club, and Ronnie took me there often. Ronnie was an excellent dancer, and he was always dressed so neat. You could almost see your face in his shoes. They always had an immaculate shine. His shirt and pants were always neatly pressed, and for a soldier he was just a little special. Other girls must have liked him too. When we were at the club, they couldn't let him alone. Several of the girls liked to dance with him, and they wouldn't wait for him to come to their table and ask for a dance. They would come to our table and ask him to dance with them. I always felt that they wanted to ignore the fact that he was with me. I didn't mind if the girls just danced with Ronnie, but I resented it terribly when they wanted to hang on to him and keep him on the floor for the next dance or two. I had to go out on the floor and rescue him on a few occasions. I think I must have been falling in love and becoming more possessive as time went by. A new place to live. Finally, I found a new place to live. Pania, a Polish lady much older than me, asked me to come and live with her. She needed me, and I needed to find a place to live. So I took her up on her offer. She only had one room, but that seemed to be enough for the both of us. It was a large room with all the facilities for living. I was in the process of moving, so I informed Ronnie that I wouldn't be able to see him that night. He didn't come that night, nor the next night, and I had already begun to wonder if he had found someone else. On the third or fourth night when he didn't show up, my girlfriend and I decided to take in a movie. When I arrived back home about midnight, I smelled smoke as I came into the room. I immediately asked Pania, my roommate, who had been visiting her, and she informed me that Ronnie had been there and had just left. Ronnie the sneak. It was disgusting to think that in my stupidity I had been out too long and had missed him. I could never forgive myself. In my disgust, I pulled my shoes off and threw them under the table. The tablecloth hung all the way down to the floor and could easily have hidden a person sneaky enough to hide under a table. Well, you probably guessed it. Ronnie the sneak came crawling out from under the table. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. I was so glad to see him. Ronnie said that he was prepared to wait for me if it took all night, and if I had been with someone else, he would have left and never returned. Ronnie was like that at that time, but I knew then that he loved me very much. Soon, to return to Russia, what was I to do? What was I going to do? I was falling deeper and deeper in love, and I might be forced to return to Russia soon. One day, Ronnie would have to return to the States, and then there goes my broken heart again. The days went by, and we kept seeing each other. My mind wandered back to the time, shortly before I met Ronnie, when I had seen a young man who had left with the previous group from our camp to return to Russia, and here he was back in Erding again. I asked what was going on, and he related the story to us. It seems that as soon as the train crossed the border into Russia, that everyone was herded off to a concentration camp. He had been lucky enough to escape and make his way back to Erding, where he knew people. I decided right at that time that I wasn't going back to Russia. I knew how cruel the communist system could be, and I felt safe in Germany, as long as the Americans were there. I would only return to Russia if I was forced to do so. I knew that I could make it by taking in washing from the American soldiers. But what would my life be like when Ronnie returned to the States? I didn't want to even think about it. But evidently Ronnie had been thinking of all these things too. He wasn't the type to tell you his plans until he was sure he was going to do something, so you could depend on what he told you. Thrilled and gripped with fear at the same time. Even so, I was thrilled and gripped with fear at the same time when he told me he wanted to marry me and take me back to the States with him. Would he really do it? I had already seen German girls suffering with broken hearts from broken promises from American soldiers who had returned to the States without warning. Could Ronnie do that to me? I wanted to believe that he wouldn't. And yet there was that nagging doubt. Maybe he was already married and had a wife and children back in the States and just wasn't telling me. Maybe I would wait for him one evening and he wouldn't come, and I would never see him again. That wouldn't be the first time that had happened where soldiers were involved. Well, thank the Lord, Ronnie was not that type of a man. He began right away to clear all the obstacles to our getting married. He filed for an extension of time so that he could remain in Germany for at least another 6 months. Security check. It seemed to take forever for them to run a security check on me and do whatever else they needed to do in order to give approval for our marriage. And before it was over, Ronnie had to get another 6 months extension. The base commander tried to talk him out of getting married to a foreign girl, but Ronnie was determined to go through with it. Our wedding day. The day finally arrived after taking forever. But now on that beautiful sunny afternoon we were ready for some action. The marriage had to be consummated by both German and American authorities. So we went to the mayor's office and he performed the wedding in German. Then, the jeep driver drove us back to the airbase and to the base chapel, where the Air Force chaplain and several others were waiting to perform it in English. That seemed to be the law for such marriages. Otherwise, our marriage wouldn't be recognized back in the States. We never did quite understand why, but who cared anyway? We were willing to do whatever was necessary to get us both back to the States together. Ronnie still had a few more months before his extension time was up, so he thought. But that thought was changed rather abruptly when he was called to the base commander's office one day. Orders from 9th Air Force Commanding General. It seems that Ronnie had been at Erding Air Depot longer than any other soldier there, and the commanding general of the 9th Air Force had directed that he be sent home with the next shipment of troops out. The next shipment, much to his amazement, was leaving out the next morning, and Ronnie had to be on that troop train. There was no use debating the subject. An order from a commanding general of a numbered air force was about the same as if God had spoken it. Even more so. People ignore God, but you can't ignore a commanding general. Ronnie knew he had to go this time, so he made immediate arrangements with the Red Cross director to take me and Ronnie Jr. under his wing and arrange for our transportation back to the States. Ronnie said that we didn't need to worry about a thing. But you imagine how a young girl wouldn't worry when she is on one side of the ocean and her husband is on the other side. I will always be grateful to that Red Cross director. It took time, but he really handled everything. All I had to do was be patient and wait. But who could be patient at such a critical time? A very vivid dream. Ronnie left Germany in the middle of February 1947, and it was now May 1947, and no word on my transportation yet. I was becoming most anxious to hear something from the Red Cross. When would they ever let me know something? Ronnie was also getting anxious back in the States. One night I had a very vivid dream. I dreamed that I walked outside and the sun was so bright, brighter than I had ever seen it before. I went back inside for a while, and when I went back outside later, it was still shining as brightly as before. My mother had taught me that dreams of this type meant that something good was about to happen. So when I awoke next morning, I had that distinct feeling that good news was forthcoming. A day or two later, it came. The Red Cross director came to the house with all the papers and reservations needed for our trip to the States. It was one of the happiest days of my life. I was on my way. Next day, I was on my way to Munich to catch a train out to the port of Bremerhaven in the north part of Germany. Again, it was the good Red Cross director that drove us there and saw to it that we were safely on the train. I spoke no English, so I couldn't understand all the conversation, but I surmised that it was a troop train, since it seemed to consist of almost all American soldiers. There was only one female soldier in all that group. It would, of course, be different today when there is a large number of female soldiers and other service women. Arrival in Bremerhaven. We arrived in Bremerhaven the next day, and were met by attendants who knew where we should go. They assigned me to some very nice facilities, along with other war brides. Our babies were taken to a nursery, where they were well looked after, but we had to go to them often for feeding. Ronnie Jr. was by now about 8 months old and had a very healthy appetite. They had such good food for babies, and he had such little good food back in Ering. Food was still hard to get in Germany. I used to go early in the morning and stand in line for hours, just to get a little milk, oatmeal and bread, while little Ronnie Jr. was all by himself at home. It was a hard life, and now we had plenty to eat, and was headed for the land of plenty. America had always seemed so far away, and I never even dreamed that one day I would actually be going there. Back in Erding, the milk that I would stand in line for was always on the verge of spoiling, and when I heated it, it would curdle. It was so bad that I was afraid sometimes to feed it to my baby. Many times I would cook oatmeal and strain it and put it in his bottle, and that was all he would have that day. No wonder he was eating everything in sight at Bremerhaven. Waiting for a full boatload. We remained at Bremerhaven for 2 or 3 weeks before finally getting enough for a full boatload. It was about the middle of May 1947 when we pulled out of the port of Bremerhaven headed for New York on the Liberty ship Aleksandra. I remembered the name of the ship because it was similar to mine. The trip was rough for much of the time. We kept running into storms that seemed to want to follow and lash us until they were sure that we would not return to re-invade their space. The baby contest. About midway of the Atlantic, they had a baby contest. Some of the babies were dressed up so pretty, but little Ronnie Jr. at 8 months old didn't have much to wear, and I felt very inadequate in entering him in the contest. But my roommate persuaded me to enter him. I really intended just to be a spectator, but before I knew it, they had pinned a ribbon on little Ronnie Jr. as the cutest baby. He had won their hearts with his cute little smiles and gurgles. Arrival in New York Harbor when we see Ronnie. I was fortunate to have another Russian girl as a roommate. We had a small stateroom to ourselves while other war brides had to share larger rooms with several others. It took us roughly 2 weeks to make the trip. We pulled into New York Harbor on May 27, 1947. Ronnie had been advised of the arrival time and was right there to meet us. His uncle Len Benson Graybeal had driven him there from Whitesville, West Virginia, so as to be there on time. We had been apart since February, and I couldn't wait to see him again. Ronnie Jr. went right to him. But later, when we stopped at a hotel for the night, little Ron Jr. objected to his daddy getting too friendly with his mother. He stuck his little arm out and tried to push Ronnie away. He was so cute trying to protect his mama. The land of plenty. We stayed all night in Oxford, Pennsylvania, and the next day, Ronnie took me to a beauty shop and then to a department store to purchase a dress and other items. I had never seen so many clothes in all my life. The abundance of everything and the millions of automobiles on the highways was enough to boggle my mind. Surely this was and is the land of plenty. A land that is blessed above all other lands. How impressed I was with the abundance of food. When we stopped to eat at a restaurant, they brought me half a chicken. I would have had to stand in line back in Germany or Russia to get that much chicken for the whole family. Ronnie promised me that I would never have to go hungry in America, and he has certainly kept that promise. We didn't have much in material goods when we first started out, but I have never had to go hungry. I remember how scared I was when I would hear anyone speak harshly about government officials such as the President of the United States. I just could not visualize that much freedom in any country in the world. One could end up in prison in Russia for speaking out against government officials. We just wouldn't dream of it. Fear of meeting Ronnie's parents. It was now May 29th, 1947, and we were on our way from Oxford, Pennsylvania to Sylvester, West Virginia, where Ronnie's parents, Mamie and Earl Graybeal, lived, and I was scared to death. I couldn't speak one word of English, and soon I was going to meet his parents. What kind of people would they be? I was from a Russian or Ukrainian peasant background. We were farm people. Ronnie was immaculate in his dress and manners. I could just imagine his parents being from high class and too good for the likes of me. We were nearing their home, and my heart wouldn't slow down. It just got faster. We finally arrived, and they all ran out to meet us. My fears quickly vanished as the family embraced me one by one and made me feel welcome. Little Ron Jr. had no trouble winning their hearts immediately. He was all smiles, and so was everyone else. Civilian life. We were so happy to be together again as a little family, and now Ronnie was a civilian for the first time since I first met him. Our lives would certainly be different, now that he was out of the armed services and on his own. He needed time to readjust and find work or return to school. He was 22 years old now and had gone into the army on 14 October 1943 while still in high school, but he had already taken a general educational development test and received his high school diploma while waiting for me to come to the States. Ronnie was eligible to enter college in the fall and would be receiving free schooling and a small veterans check. But until then, we needed money to live on. In 1947, the dollar was worth about 5 times what it is worth today, and all new veterans were receiving $20 per week for a maximum of 40 weeks to give them time to find employment. Also, Ronnie was beginning to receive $13.80 per month for a combat-connected disability. His parents let us live in one of their houses rent-free, and that was a great help to us. The first few weeks were spent with Ronnie's parents and his two younger twin brothers, Jack and Joe, who were about 14 years old. Quarters were just a little tight, since they were not exactly equipped to handle an additional family and only had 2 bedrooms. Little Ron Jr. was quite satisfied with his little bed made from one of Ronnie's shipping trunks. But we were getting more than anxious to have more living space. We needed more space. In order to have more room, we cleaned out a storage room in the house, next door belonging to Ronnie's parents. It was a fairly large room, but the entry door had been sealed off from the rest of the house, which was then occupied by Ronnie's first cousin, Vaughn Graybeale, and his family. We didn't let the lack of a door deter us from using the room, though, as a temporary residence. It had 2 large windows, one of which opened onto the porch. With the window removed, we could move furniture in and set up housekeeping. With the window reinstalled and with the ability to raise it up and down easily, we could step in or out without any problem. When one is young, these things pose no big problems. We only needed to live in the single room for a short time, and then Cousin Vaughn and his family moved out, leaving the whole house for us. We had just come out of the Great Depression, which began in 1929, and then had gone through a terrible World War. So houses were built during the Depression from very rough lumber, and it was rare to find one in that area of West Virginia that had even been painted. The common people could not afford more than the most simply constructed house. So, this was the type of house Ronnie's parents owned in 1947. Post-Depression times. Ronnie's parents later built a nice home for themselves, and all the children have nice homes of their own at this time. But in 1947, they were still living in Depression times houses, along with thousands of other families in the area. Even their restaurant was built of rough lumber, having been built around 1937 to accommodate patrons of the local baseball park. Their restaurant started off as a very small hot dog and hamburger stand with beer, soft drinks, candy, cigarettes, etc. added. This was meant to be basically a weekend business, but business was so good, even through the week, that the need for an expanded area came quickly, and there were several additions resulting, until eventually living quarters were added. It was in these quarters that we spent our first few weeks after my arrival from Germany. Ronnie says that electricity wasn't even available in the area when the little restaurant was built, and there was no inside plumbing. Water for cooking, drinking, and washing hands and body was provided by a hand pump. Most of the water for washing clothes was carried from the river nearby in wash tubs by Ronnie and a younger brother Roy. Restroom facilities consisted of an outhouse some 30 to 40 yards from the building. When I arrived from Germany in 1947, electricity was in abundance. Running water was installed in the restaurant and living quarters. But the outhouse was still in use and remained in use for the next few years, even into the early 1950s. While there was running water in the restaurant, there was no running water in the Depression-era house where we would be living until 1951. Our heating system consisted of a potbelly, Burnside stove, set up in one room. Those things could be dismantled into 4 parts for storage purposes after the winter months were over. This gave us more room in the living area for the spring, summer, and autumn months. Our cooking stove was a coal-burning Morningside range with 4 islets, a water reservoir, and an oven for baking. It doubled also as a very good heater, which was great in the winter-time and for cool mornings, but terrible for the hot summer months. I couldn't speak a word of English. Those first few months of 1947 were very critical ones for us. I couldn't speak a word of English. And the first time I was left alone for a few hours, I wept in loneliness until Ronnie returned. I was in a situation where I picked up English rapidly out of necessity. I had no formal English training, but I had a good ear for languages, and I quickly learned enough to converse in everyday street language. Although Ronnie and I continued to speak German together for a long time thereafter. My 7th language, English, was being added as the 7th language for me. But little Ron Jr. didn't quite know what to learn to speak. He would hear English from his grandparents, German from Ronnie and me, and Russian when no one else was around. When a train went by on the other side of the river, little Ron Jr. would run to the window and point his little finger toward it, and gleefully squeal out the Russian word, "Poyest mama, poyest mama." It was a few years before he would call it a train. My entire past life had been on a farm, so naturally I wanted to plant a garden. Ronnie's father showed me a spot of ground where I could plant, and we got someone to plough the ground, and I raised a beautiful garden that first year with occasional help from my husband Ronnie. He wasn't too keen on gardening, but I was pregnant with little Norma Jean, who is now Deanie Robinson, with 7 children of her own. I was pregnant with her back in Germany, but now it was beginning to show, and I needed help with the heavier things. I didn't know then that pregnant women were not supposed to be raising gardens and doing other hard work, and I guess it was just as well that I didn't. Our funds were just about at rock bottom at that time, and the garden kept us eating. Ronnie goes to college. Ronnie enrolled under the GI Bill at Morris Harvey College, now Charleston University, in Charleston, West Virginia in September 1947. He majored in business administration, and the government paid his tuition, and we received a small check while he attended school. Little Ron Jr. was having his first birthday on the 9th of September, and Norma Jean, Deanie, arrived in the world on the 20th of October, 1947. With Ronnie having to study each night, we were beginning to be busy. School was not easy for Ronnie. He had a rough time, just trying to get there and back each day. It was 35 miles into Charleston and 35 miles back home. His transportation was by Greyhound bus, share the ride, catch a ride, and once in a while by borrowed automobile. His father usually had an extra automobile in a pinch. Ronnie kept this up for about 2 years before giving up on school for a while. It was really hard for us during that first 2 years, but we were young then and could suffer the hardships a little better than we could now in 1993. Things were tough. Ronnie took a job in the coal mines while I kept working my garden. This garden was actually located on the nearby farm of John Holly. It was about 1/4 of a mile from our house, and I normally took my babies with me when I went to work the garden. I remember so well when we first went to the Holly farm. I saw milk sitting in the large milk cans to be picked up by the dairy truck. I asked them how much of it had to go to the government, and I was amazed that none of it did, and that they could keep all of it for themselves. Flashback to Russia. I will remind you that in Russia, a large percentage of the Holly farm milk production would have gone to the government. This was true also of egg production. As a matter of fact, production shortages were no excuse. John Holly would have had to pay in cash to make up the shortage if there was not enough production to meet the quota set by the government if he had been living in the Soviet Union. It took a while for me to get used to all the freedom here in the United States. I had never known anything but restrictions of one kind or another in my lifetime. And here in the United States, one could get into his automobile and drive all the way to California and not even mention it to government officials. What a life! I could see, though, that most Americans did not appreciate this freedom in the same manner that I did. That irritated me a bit then, but it is understandable now that I have been Americanized. It was so good to be free. But if one had never known enslavement or bondage, how could he possibly understand how great it is to be free? So, I do understand how Americans can take their freedom for granted. Things began to be a little better for us as Ronnie began to work and bring home a paycheck. He was good, but he liked to drink a little in those days, and I would be terribly worried if he didn't come home on time. My insecurities could rush in on me at times if things didn't go well. I missed my family in Russia and had no earthly idea where they were. I was afraid to try to make contact with them and let them know where I was, because I was afraid for their welfare. Prayers for my family in Russia. You would have to understand how the Soviet government thought. They could and probably would have branded me as a traitor to the Soviet Union for leaving, and then do harm to my family to punish me. I knew how the KGB operated, and that bothered me greatly. I would often pray for my family as I had seen my dear mother pray, even though I didn't really understand prayer. I know now that the Lord hears those prayers, even when we don't understand much about them. Little Ron Jr. would often watch me pray, and somehow in his innocence, he must have understood prayer better than I. One day, when he was about 3 years old, a strong wind began to blow, and soon there was lightning and thunder. He grabbed me by the hand, and practically dragging me into the house, he quickly led me to the bedside and dropped to his little knees and said, "God, don't let big rain come. Let little rain come." After repeating this a time or two, he seemed satisfied that we were out of danger, and as it turned out, a little rain came. How lonely I was. Ronnie, nor his family, could possibly have known how lonely I was at times, and how much I missed my family. Ronnie had to be away for at least 10 hours each day when he went to work, and that left me with so much time alone to think of all the past misery I had gone through. I was just in my early 20s and didn't really understand how damaging negative thought could be at that time. It is a wonder that I kept my sanity now as I look back on it. Ronnie's parents and the restaurant were nearby, so naturally I was in and out of their place about every day, and perhaps that was a real blessing to me and helped pull me through the loneliness. The 2 children also helped me to keep my mind off of myself. Deanie was only 11 months younger than Ronnie Jr., and both of them could be a handful at times. Little Norma Jean. I haven't said much about little Norma Jean, Deanie, yet. She was born 20th October 1947 and was such a beautiful baby. Her hair was black and the longest I have ever seen for a newborn baby. I plaited her hair when we brought her home from the hospital. She was born in the Charleston General Hospital in Charleston, West Virginia, and she had such a perfect little shapely body that one of the nurses carried her around naked just to show off her little body and her long hair. She was something to behold indeed. She's called Deanie because little Ron Jr. tried to call her Jeannie, and it kept coming out as Deanie. After a while, others picked up on the name. Deanie and she is still known by that name until this very day. Little Deanie was so independent. You could pick her up for a few minutes of cuddling, but any more than that, and she would begin to wiggle and say, "Gimme down." Her Uncle Joe used to tease her by leaving the door slightly open just to hear her order him from her baby crib to cut that door. We never quite knew whether she was saying cut for shut, or whether she was confusing it with the expression cut that out. She could amuse herself for hours by sitting and bumping the back of her head on the headboard of her little baby crib. She would rock herself to sleep that way. When she learned to walk, she ran on her tiptoes instead of walking. She did this for several months before settling down to walking normal. Near disaster. One day, when Deanie was a little older, perhaps 3, little Ron Jr. came running into the house screaming. Something had happened to Deanie. I ran out with him to see what had happened, and saw Deanie lying on the ground unconscious, near a 60-gallon drum containing gasoline. A hose was hanging from the drum, and it was obvious that the hose had been in her mouth. I was panic-stricken as I grabbed her up in my arms and ran for help. My mother-in-law, Mamie, quickly got some soda and mixed it with water, and we forced this into her. She began to gag a little and finally came to. Her face was blue, and we were really scared until we could see that she was fully awake and out of danger. That was the last time she tried gasoline, but we had to constantly be on the alert with our children. There were just too many things around for them to get into. Ronnie's parents had an auto repair shop and a used car lot in addition to their restaurant. So 60-gallon drums containing gasoline or motor oil were common. Other items for children to keep away from were just as common, so we really had to keep an eye on our 2 kids. Little Ron Jr.'s brush with death. I will never forget one event that could have snuffed out the life of little Ron Jr., and it scared us all to death, or as near death as one can get in such an event. These are near heart attack experiences. An automobile was setting out in front of the restaurant, headed out of the driveway, while the young driver was inside making purchases. No one was in the automobile, and Ron Jr. had wandered outside and had spotted the nice, shiny front bumper and was attracted to it. He was standing in front of the vehicle when the young man came out of the restaurant and walked around back and up front and climbed in on the driver's side, completely unaware of the presence of a child. The driver started his engine and, true to his colours, started to scratch off. Almost as if by divine intervention, a sharp whistle from a buddy caused him to hit his brake. He had not moved more than 2 feet. Neither the whistler nor the driver had yet seen little Ron Jr., and I am sure that neither one would know even to this day that guardian angels could have been involved. The impact was just enough to knock the little boy down, and he came up screaming. The driver was so scared that he just went back inside and wouldn't move until he was able to calm his nerves down a bit. Our first automobile. The great day had arrived. We were about to buy our very first automobile. It was 1949, and we had still not been able to afford an automobile. Ronnie's family owned a used car lot, and they had a 1937 Plymouth that was within our feeble budget, so we made the purchase. Ronnie's parents were not the type to give the children things that they felt the children should provide for themselves, so a free automobile was completely out of the question. As it turned out, this was good training for all the children. Well, our 1937 Plymouth was 12 years old, and it had probably been driven to the moon and back a few times, but it was about the best we could afford at the time. I will always remember the one night that Ronnie went somewhere and didn't get home until very late that night. He parked the car somewhere near his father's repair shop and sneaked into the house. He was real sneaky in those days. I wasn't very happy with that little episode, and I let my feelings be known in no uncertain terms the very next morning. While I was still smouldering from my indignation, I thought I would go out and check out the car for any incriminating evidences. Not that I didn't trust him. Well, no one had warned me that there might be other vehicles that looked just exactly like ours. So naturally, the very first one I came across looked exactly like ours, so I thought it was. I screamed out as I saw the hood standing open and no engine in the car. I just knew that Ronnie had lost his engine on the way home. Ronnie looked on with glee as I was petrified. I had a sudden urge to kill about that time. That was how much I knew about automobiles in 1949. I have learned much more since then, but I really didn't get around to learning to drive until about 1965. That opened up an entirely new life for me and broke up that homebound feeling that a wife has who does not drive an automobile. Of course, I had my own vehicle and could go when I felt like it.